Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your WireTaps for Monday, December 13th, 2021. I'm joined by Alex Brown from Cornwall, England. How are things going, Alex?
Very good. Thank you, Graham.
So I've got, some personal news. I'm excited that, I'm going to be getting back out onto stage with the band. I don't know if I mentioned this to you the other day, but we have a concert, the first concert since COVID has, been kind of getting in the way of those things. So I'm kind of looking forward to that next week.
No, fantastic. Maybe we'll get some new music clip to intro the wiretaps from your concert.
We'll have to see. But yes, and speaking of music, I don't know if you ever listened to this podcast called How I Built This, which is a podcast I think it's run by NPR. And it's basically, they have this guy at NPR who sits down with people who've started companies and, just explores how they got to where they are. And his company's big and small, right? So, but they did one with about a record label the other day called Merge Records, which is a kind of an indie label. And they actually sat down with the founders of that, who are also in a band called Superchunk. And I don't know if people like that sort of thing, but it was totally up my alley to learn sort of, they described running a record label as like being a venture capitalist. You make all these bets on bands, and you know that most of them are not going to sell that many records, and you just hope that one of them, in the case of Merge, it was a band called the Arcade Fire, kind of comes through and makes, pays for all the other projects that you've got running.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was interesting.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. As someone in a completely different domain, but, obviously I've done a couple of books self-published, and basically in that domain, you're an entrepreneur. You're hoping that it sticks, but yeah, you could call yourself an author or a publisher or whatever, but fundamentally you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, so let's get into the MBA stuff. So what happened last week? Because I know it was kind of a nutty week in terms of decisions and everything.
Yeah, lots and lots of decisions came out last week. Livewire was really sort of vibrant in terms of sort of returning to its peaks of last season, which is always great to see for the first time this season. So, yeah. I mean, the big news obviously was Harvard, Stanford releasing their decisions, and I did remember reading one post of someone that got a rejection from Stanford, and basically said that just took this little bit of the edge off, the sting off the admit from HBS that had come either the day before or shortly thereafter or whatever it was. But I mean, these are clearly first world problems when you get into one of the top two and not the other. And it's a super interesting week last week, no doubt, but lots of schools, not just Harvard and Stanford, releasing decisions. And then this upcoming week, the days ahead of us, we still got some other leading programs scheduled to release decisions. So Wharton and Sloan would be the marquee schools, but obviously Haas right behind them. And we've got Duke, Anderson, Cornell, and McCombs and so forth. So yeah, lots of activity to come this week, Graham.
Yeah, I love to see all the posts on the wires, and yeah, ideally everybody gets in somewhere. That's the optimal solution. But there's this strange period where you don't have all your decisions in, and you're trying to figure out where you're going to go. And I will put in a brief plug for Decision Wire, which is a tool on the site that you use once you've got your offers, or know kind of what you're thinking. You can kind of post there and say, "Hey, I got in here. Here's where I'm going to go." Or you can post undecided and let the peanut gallery or Alex or other members of our team weigh in on what you might want to do with various choices you have. So yeah, keep an eye on Decision Wire as well. Alex, over on the website, we ran a couple more Real Humans pieces. One was with Chicago Booth, which was I think we talked to 5 or 6 students there. And then we also did one with Rice down in Texas. So a couple more of those for people to read. There was a piece that we ran that the director of admissions from Georgetown put out this interesting story about kind of dispelling myths for women and the MBA. So just all about, some of the stuff that's the stereotypes and things that are out there when it comes to women and management education. So that's a good read as well. And, obviously the interview reports continue to flow in on the site. We love seeing those, adding those to the archives. Again, we have the largest archive across the internet of interview reports for MBA applicants. So very cool stuff. And then the last thing, Alex, is that I did, as I mentioned, I think a couple weeks ago, is I sat down with Bruce Delmonico from Yale School of Management. and we recorded a special episode of the podcast where did an admissions director, Q&A, and that aired last week. So if you missed that, go back and listen if you're interested in Yale. Bruce is just such a great guy that it's a fun listen. Maybe even if you're not applying to Yale, he had a lot of good advice. So tune into that. Other than that, I guess there is one other thing, Alex, which is that I think we're going to do Clubhouse again this week, right?
That's the plan. Clubhouse on Thursday. So let's have a good conversation about folks that got their decisions over the last several weeks, as well as folks that are planning their strategy for round two, because quite frankly, Graham, round two is literally just round the corner.
Yeah, I think people who join us, it's going to be this Thursday at noon Eastern. Yeah, you can either bask in the glow of acceptances and maybe ask us where we think you should go, or if you've had bad news or you're working on round two applications, we can obviously chime in on strategy there. I did want to mention, Alex, we got another review. So this is like 2 weeks in a row, I think, where we've had reviews, and this review, I have to read it on the air, and you'll know why when I get through it. I did share it with you on Slack the other day, but it's from somebody named Justin, and he writes that the podcast is valuable for folks at any stage of MBA admissions. He says, Graham and Alex are great at what they do. Specifically, their WireTaps episodes are a great resource for anyone wondering which schools to target. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but these fellas help to clear some of that up. Write your story on ApplyWire on ClearAdmit's site, and you might be lucky enough to get a segment of the podcast dedicated to your questions. Basically, free admissions consulting from two pros. P.S. Everyone raves about Alex's accent, and rightfully so. But in my opinion, Graham has a very underrated voice, smooth yet peppy. 10 out of 10 recommend. So it is true. No one's ever commented on my voice because I just have that plain old, American accent. But so it's good to get some props from Justin. So we're going to thank him for submitting that. What do you have to say about this, Alex?
I just want to know where everyone's raving because I want to go join the rave.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it is fantastic. Well, I'm thrilled, quite frankly, that folks really appreciate the WireTaps episodes because, obviously, when we first started doing it, we didn't know if people would tune in and listen and, like the format or whatever. But I think it's proven quite successful. So thank you, Justin, for those very kind words. But we're seeing, some really good positive momentum, which I think is terrific.
Yeah, very cool stuff. So let's move on and talk about the candidates that you've picked out for this week. If you're ready to do that, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to cover.
Yes, let's kick on.
All right. So, and now I'm going to look for, I actually have to find the first one. Just give me a second here, Alex, while I pull it up. But I will say, once again, you picked out a set of ApplyWire candidates this week, and they've got, they're kind of all over the map, both geographically and in terms of the, issues that we're dealing with. But let's move on. I've got our first one up now. I had a little bit of a technical glitch, but here we go. So this is going to be WireTaps candidate number 1. So this is, as I said, an ApplyWire entry. And this person, it looks like they're not going to be starting business school until 23. They are applying to 7 schools, and those schools include Duke, Michigan, Minnesota Carlson, MIT Sloan, Kellogg, Booth, and UVA Darden. This person's been working in engineering and industrial automation in the gas and chemical industry. And their post-MBA career, they list other. We'll get into that in a moment. A GMAT score is a 710. They are going to retake it because they've been scoring much higher on their mock tests. So they're going to retake that. Their GPA is a 3.76, and they've got 3.5 years of work experience to date. They're located in the Midwest, and they'd love to stay there or land on the East Coast. And Alex, I know you initially posted a comment to this person, and so I'll let you kind of start things off and walk us through. I also chimed in on the site too, but let's get into it. What do you make of this candidacy? And they gave us a lot more sort of data in the post about some of their outside activities and things, but what do you think of this candidate overall?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I think this is potentially a very strong candidate. I mean, they're a chemical engineering undergrad, and we know that's one of the toughest disciplines for undergraduate study, and rigorous, I should say, not necessarily tough, but rigorous. And the 3.76 GPA out of chemical engineering, I think, is absolutely fantastic. They've got a 710 GMAT, but they are very disappointed with that, i.e. they think there's significant room for improvement. If there is significant room for improvement, then yes, you should be taking it again so that you do present your maximum score. That's sort of standard advice. And they think they can do that. They're like you say, they're planning to apply next season, so they have some time. So that's good. So let's assume that they come to the application process with the 740 GMAT, with the 376 chemical engineering undergrad, with 4.5 years experience at that point, with several promotions at work. They're struggling a little bit in terms of trying to figure out how they're going to portray or articulate their impact. It's not just about managing people, but it's about sort of your overall impact in terms of what you've done, what projects you've been on, how that's changed, the impacts of those projects or whatever it might be. But there's several ways to look at impact. So I think on the whole, all that side of the candidacy is going to be quite strong. I mean, it might be that their extracurriculars are a little bit on the weaker side. I'd have to sort of remind myself exactly what they've done.
Well, they said they do. They said that they play pickleball and hockey.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they mean ice hockey, or maybe field hockey. I'm not sure. Or street hockey. And then they also mentioned they really enjoy riding their motorcycle, which, is kind of a solo thing, but did jump out at me as kind of, you don't see everyone talking about that. So yeah, they don't have big time community service, but they're talking about maybe getting into some stuff with Rotary. So that was their kind of EC profile.
Yeah. So the point is they're not unidimensional, i.e. they only work. So they can check the box of being more multidimensional with their sort of athletic pursuits. I presume pickleball is some kind of sport. I don't even know what that is, Graham.
I think it's in the tennis family, if I remember correctly. But it's new and it's sort of all the rage in the U.S. for some reason. Yeah, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, no, very good. So
it doesn't involve pickles. That I know that.
I had no idea what it was, but I enjoyed it. And like you say, riding motorcycles, and that there could be something about that sort of adventure and travel or whatever that they can package. They're trying to get involved in something like their Rotary, but I wouldn't force something just to show something to the admissions committee, right? So, we really do think there's high value to be drawn from extracurricular activities to sort of show that you're well-rounded, show that you have sort of compassion and passion for other issues and so on and so forth. But trying to force it, usually AdCom will sniff that out. So do stuff you're truly interested in and passionate about. And in this case, it might be more on the athletic, the sports side, and it's also with what they're doing, the motorcycle. But frankly, I think all the other aspects of this candidacy, Graham, sort of strike me as this is a solid M7 type candidate if they get all their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
In terms of they've got another sort of year or at least several months before they've actually got to start thinking about applying, right? If they're applying next season, and they're not coming from probably an environment that's sort of chock full of MBAs. So maybe some of their perception of the process is a tad naive, but they'll get through that over the next several months and be able to string together a really solid candidacy, I would think, Graham.
Yeah, and I want to put you on the spot and ask you a very direct question, because they said in their post that, that they had the list of schools that I mentioned, which, is kind of it's sort of a wide variety of schools, but it's not top heavy, that's for sure. It's not M7 heavy, I guess you could say, as compared to other people we see.
Yeah.
And they mentioned that they wondered if they should apply to schools lower ranking to get more scholarship dollars, and they refer to the immense opportunity cost of getting an MBA.
Yeah.
And that made me realize that, they're probably not coming from a background where everyone around them is going off to get the degree, because you hear that sort of rhetoric a lot in people who are maybe a little less familiar with the degree. And so what do you think about this? Like, should they apply to lower ranking schools to get more dollars or what?
No, I completely agree. And that was the signal to me that they're a little bit, again, I hate to use the word naive because, there might be sort of negative connotations to that. But their risk tolerance is probably not as high as other folks that are around the MBA more closely and really understand the payback and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of wanting to target lower ranked programs in order to get scholarship money, in order to reduce the burden of the cost and so on and so forth, that strategy is fine if those lower ranked programs can still allow you to execute on your goals, whatever your goals are, and to the maximum, right? So, I mean, for example, let's say the goal was just in sort of management consulting. Yeah, sure, top 20 program will get you into management consulting, top 25, that's fine, top 16 will, top 10, 5, whatever. But it's clear that the higher the profile, the higher the tier of school that you attend, the more access you will have to, let's say, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, which are the top tier management consulting firms.
Sure.
So by dropping lower to get the scholarship money, you're reducing your opportunity for that really high paying or whatever outcome and so on and so forth. So they really need to factor that in, depending on the specificity of their goal focus.
Yeah.
That their strategy could backfire. We always say, Graham, I think, try to go to the school from the highest tier that you can. The opportunities are ridiculously brilliant at this point, or at least according to the Wall Street Journal or whatever.
Yeah, Alex is referring to that. There's a recent article for our listeners that that the journal published about how the MBA is one of the few master's degrees that is absolutely a good deal, even if you're borrowing money, to pay for it, which most people are. It totally pays back. So I think, yeah, it is. I know it's daunting, and there is an immense opportunity cost.
Yeah.
But if you look at the outcomes and the average starting salaries and the time to pay back, the MBA wins every time, especially if you go to the top programs. So I would encourage this candidate to keep that in mind. But again, great candidacy. And I feel like if they nail the GMAT the way that it sounds like they're going to be able to as they retake it, they should be in great shape. They have a lot to offer. They have some interesting career plans, potentially initially with consulting, but in the long term with energy and renewables. So there's a lot going on here, and I'm hoping that they can. I know I always say this, but I'm hoping they can weave some of their existing experiences in the energy sector into those goals, because that'll help them stand out as opposed to just sort of saying, yeah, I just want to do consulting and for any industry, right? So again, very interesting candidate, and they're fortunate in that they're kind of an early bird. They're ready to go, so they have all this extra time. Before we move on, Alex, to our next candidate, I wanted to. I looked this up, and I think we owe it to our listeners. Pickleball is a paddleball sport that combines elements of badminton, table tennis, and tennis. 2 or 4 players use solid paddles made of wood or composite materials to hit a perforated polymer ball, much like a wiffle ball, over a net. So it is really kind of like tennis, but with kind of ping pong sized, like these weird paddles and a strange ball. I think the court's smaller than a tennis court. But anyway, there you have it.
That's fantastic. You've taught me something I'll never need to know again.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. All right, so let's move on and talk about WireTaps candidate number 2. So this is an ApplyWire entry, and this person's actually in the process of applying right now. They actually applied to some schools in round 1, and they've got another batch of schools that they're prepping for round 2. The list of schools is 7 long, and it includes Columbia, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Chicago Booth, Wharton, and Yale. So a really this is a more top-heavy list as compared to our first candidate. And again, they want to start school next fall. They've been working in government, and they want to work in nonprofit social impact after business school. They've got a 720 on the GMAT and a 3.8 GPA. They've been working for 7 years, and they're located in Taipei, Taiwan. This person does mention they're a Taiwanese national female, and they've been working in public financial infrastructure. And in fact, their employer is sponsoring them. So they literally can go back and work there after business school. I believe they're the only employee that managed to win this sort of sponsorship, which is great. They also include in their notes that they speak their mother tongue, which I'm going to assume is Mandarin Chinese, that they also speak English and fluent French, and that they're learning Japanese. So there's a lot more I could get into here. I would like for you, Alex, to walk us through where they applied so far and what those results have been, because that's important to factor in as we give them advice. But they've had some good news, mostly good news, but also some more middle ground news. So why don't you walk us through what's happened so far, and then share your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that this candidate applied in round one, got some results, and is strategizing for round two. They've gotten admissions at Columbia, early decision, and they're waitlisted at Sloan without an interview.
Yeah.
So, and I think they also got admitted to Yale, if memory serves.
That's right.
So, fair play. They've done very well. So now they're thinking, well, I should have a reach at Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and maybe also Chicago in the second round. So I think that's very good. So the sort of elephant in the room here is you've got admitted to Columbia early decision. Are you obliged to go? Should you be considering round two applications? And this is a question that several candidates struggle with each season, and there's lots of differing opinion in terms of what candidates should do. So, Graham, I'm just going to bounce it back to you. Imagine we're playing pickleball and I'm knocking the ball back to you with whatever paddle I'm using. And I'm going to ask you first for your opinion on that, and then I will add mine. But I don't want to go first because I might get fired or something like that.
No, I mean, this is an interesting one, right? Because technically Columbia's early decision round is designed for people who, plan to go there. And so you get in, and the idea is you withdraw other applications. I mean, it does happen where people get other results or, but the idea is that if you get in, you go. They have a very hefty deposit, which is in place for this precise reason. So, I think you're only given a few weeks to make the decision and deposit. And maybe this candidate has deposited, or maybe they've said, you know what, I'd actually rather go to Yale. And so they're going to let that offer from Columbia expire and apply elsewhere in round two. I don't know. Personally, this has always been a point of controversy in that some people say, well, you shouldn't be applying elsewhere once you've got an admit from ED if you're, in that it'd be really unfair to hold that spot or something. So you get into this gray area where, Columbia is one of the only schools that sort of operates this way. So it's a bit of an outlier in the market. Most other schools you apply, you get in, you've got plenty of time to sort of figure out if you want to go there, you could shop around, et cetera. So this is a tough one. I always come down on the side. I'm kind of pro-applicant in this sort of domain in that I feel like, let people choose. And so now, obviously, I think what Columbia would say is if that's the case, they should have just applied in the regular round, right? But it is a tough call. I think my view is that because the deposit is so big compared to a regular MBA program deposit, it's sort of like, well, if you want to deposit and walk away from that money, then that's the cost of it, and so it's tough. I mean, I feel like Columbia can fill their class, several times over with great candidates. So I don't know. It's a tough call. What's your take on this?
I think it's a very tough call because, quite frankly, if you applied regular decision to Columbia, you're at a disadvantage because Columbia doesn't think that you're prioritizing it because you should have applied early decision.
Right.
So, I mean, it is a real conundrum. So I have absolute empathy. Well, not empathy because I'm obviously not targeting these programs myself, but I completely understand folks that do choose to walk away from that decision. And in this case, take a shot at are they eligible for Stanford or Harvard or Wharton? I'm not sure whether it's worth jumping through hoops to also apply to Chicago. I mean, to me, Chicago, Columbia, they're in the same tier. They're both outstanding programs, but whether it's worth walking away from Columbia's early decision to go to Chicago is a bit more of a debate. But it's a very tough decision. This looks like an outstanding candidate. As you said, sponsored. looks like they've got some really good global experience, and they check the boxes in terms of several other factors, and yeah. Why wouldn't you take a shot at Stanford? I think Stanford is the one that they're really keen on. So take a shot.
Yeah, they're a humanities major undergrad, and they're thinking that that may be a bit of a weakness in the sense of their quantitative readiness.
Graham, that's not a weakness at all, right?
I know.
Yeah. Let's quash that.
Yeah.
As long as they've shown quant aptitude on the GMAT or whatever, that's not a problem. And in fact, Graham, I mean, I forget what sort of degree you might have got, but certainly wasn't quant focused, right?
No, mine was art history. But I think she also, her role is, a public finance infrastructure. So I feel like, and the GMAT 720, I don't know what the quant percentile is. I actually asked her that on the site. She hasn't responded, but it's I feel like this is a great candidacy and should absolutely look at some of these other programs in round 2. And I think I wouldn't rule out that offer from Yale too, if she, like, in the sense that she's sponsored. Yale has an amazing brand in Asia where she's going back as a university. It's a kind of world-renowned school. She's going to be working in social impact. So there's some Yale. She needs to look carefully at Yale as well, especially if she's trying to decide, do I put down the deposit at Columbia? What am I doing here? Like, what's the next step?
Yeah.
But I do agree with you. Chicago's the one that I'm sort of like, well, she already has an offer from within that tier, and she's going to apply to these others. Like, I just wonder, some of it depends on how much time she has and her recs. But I don't know. If she has time, I guess apply everywhere, see where the chips fall and where the dollars fall. She might get some scholarship so you never know.
Yeah.
But this is a tough one. I mean, I think, it's, we get one of these every year. So it's just fun to talk about, but it is a conundrum, as you said.
And a terrific candidate again.
Absolutely. All right. So let's move on. I want to thank her for posting and move on to WireTaps candidate number 3. So this is another ApplyWire entry from a candidate that is in process. I think they're mostly applying in round 2. They've got 6 schools on the target list, and those schools are Cornell, Duke, Harvard, Stanford, UCLA, and USC. They have been working in sales, operations, and project management at a healthcare company. They would love to stay in the kind of pharma domain post-MBA. They mentioned Johnson & Johnson as a potential target, so they're interested in healthcare. GMAT score 700. The undergraduate GPA is a 7.3 out of 10, I presume. They've got 4 years of experience, I think mostly done in a rotational leadership program where they received 4 promotions. Again, healthcare industry. This candidate wants to land in the U.S., but mentions that they are from Latin America, and I believe that, I don't know where they said it, but they studied engineering, and they had an above average GPA for their class. So I think they were trying to signal that 7.3 out of 10 was actually pretty good for the school they attended, and they said it was the 3rd best university in all of Latin America. So that's kind of the background. I know you had some dialogue with this candidate, and we're thinking together, you and I were talking a bit about the target schools list.
Yeah.
But walk us through what are the odds that this person gets in, or not percentage odds, because we don't really do that, but just what's your take on this candidacy and where they should be applying given their goals?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, this is another great candidate in my book. I mean, maybe the numbers aren't quite as outstanding as our prior 2 candidates, and such, but this candidate's from Latin America, which sort of generally is slightly underrepresented. Female from Latin America, so that sort of adds to that. She's done very well at work as far as I can tease out in terms of what she's posted. Her numbers are very, very decent, I think, without being necessarily outstanding, but nevertheless they're within range of top programs. I'm a little concerned that she's, in terms of her target program, she's shooting at the moon a bit for Harvard and Stanford, and then being very realistic, as it were, with Johnson, Fuqua, Anderson, and Marshall. And there's a gap between the 2. So if I'm sort of advising on strategy in terms of targeting programs specifically, and she's interested in healthcare, Graham, or at least that's sort of a lot of her sort of experience and so forth. I'm like, Wharton and Kellogg sort of smack me in the face as really, these should be the target programs for this candidate. And that sort of sits between that sort of Harvard, Stanford, and then you got Wharton, Kellogg or whatever before you hit Duke is another very good program for healthcare that she has on the list, and so on and so forth. So I think she should be looking at readjusting a little bit her target list of schools, having a bit more confidence overall in her candidacy. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like here, Graham.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I did some digging on the GMAT percentiles, and she's, 700 overall, but she's going to retake the test.
Yeah.
But she has a 74th percentile on the math, and and the verbal was something like, where is it? 80th percentile. So a balanced score, which is a nice thing to see. So there's not like this sort of glaring weakness jumping out. And again, we talk about this a lot, but applying from Latin America, the average test scores are not as high as they are out of, say, India or the US, because there's not a tradition of standardized testing in these markets, right? So I'm okay. I mean, obviously, if she takes the test again, it'll certainly boost her odds of getting into some of the very best schools if she performs better. But I could not agree more that I was puzzling over the school selection because, and actually, I mean, this is maybe silly, but part of me was thinking, boy, there's a lot of warm weather climates on the list here. You've got Duke, which is in the South. You've got Stanford, UCLA, and USC, which are all in sunny California. So I was kind of wondering if there was kind of an aversion to being in a kind of, cold market, with the exception of, she's got Harvard on the list, which, I think a lot of people want to apply to Harvard because it's, such a big brand. And then she has Cornell. So that's the only one that was sort of a mystery.
I think Cornell dispels that myth just right there. It's not known as being warm in the winter, Graham.
No, I know. But I was trying to figure out, where's this list coming from? Because when I think of someone who wants to work in healthcare, the first thing I think of is Wharton's healthcare management program, because it's one of the only, I think it's the only top MBA program where you literally declare, it's a special track, that you declare as you're applying. So I was thinking of Wharton, I was thinking of Kellogg, like you said, Duke, which is on her list. Even Michigan Ross has been doing a lot of interesting things in the healthcare domain. And obviously some of the schools on her list, like Duke and Harvard, and to some extent Cornell, have interesting things happening there too. But I just was trying to figure out, where this list came from. And I feel like, it could probably be revised and revisited. And, to some extent, depending on the GMAT, it could be shifted upscale a little bit. I mean, these are all great schools. These are all arguably top 16 type schools. But, when you talk about a Kellogg or a Wharton, like you're saying, they might fill that gap between the Harvard or Stanford and the USC, right?
Yeah.
So in any event, I think this is a great candidate. And I did forget to mention that her first remark in her notes was, "Hey guys, love the podcast." So that must be why you picked her, Alex.
That was one of the reasons. One of the other reasons was we didn't have a lot of choice on who to pick this week, frankly, Graham.
Oh, really?
So more apply wire entries would be very welcome. But no, seriously, great candidate, and obviously it's really great that she loves the podcast. The only other thing that I would add to this conversation is she's also done MBA math, Graham, which to me sort of shows that she is doing everything that she can to be appealing to the very top program. So kudos for doing that.
Yeah, and I think, that you couple that with the humanities major and it's a non-issue. She has a decent GMAT quant percentile.
No, she's not the humanities major, Graham. She's the engineer.
Oh, that's right. She's the engineer. Sorry, I'm getting my candidates confused now.
Yes, come on, man.
But yeah, so I'm not worried about this aspect of her profile. I mean, obviously, if she takes the test and does even better, super, right? But I think she could get into some top schools as is. I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention is that, and this is something that was really appealing, is that, she mentioned that she's, she has all these other activities and she's been to 60 countries. So I don't know, there's just a lot to like here in terms of, if I'm an admissions reader seeing this. So again, I would encourage her to just think carefully about school selection, But yeah, it seems like this could be someone who ends up with multiple offers if all goes to plan.
Yeah, 60 countries. Wow.
Yeah, that's that's a lot. Yeah. So, in any event, that's kind of our final candidate for this week. I did want to say, you mentioned we need more apply wire entries. I was thinking that at some point, and maybe as soon as next week, or maybe it's the week after, we'll get into doing some of the decision wire discussion as people have multiple offers and are trying to decide. We often like to chime in on those too.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that, because that's always fun to see, where someone's gotten in, what kind of dollars they've got on offer from these schools, and how to pick where to go. So that'll be fun too.
Yeah.
Alex, thanks for picking these out. I want to ask our listeners to please tell at least one person you know about this podcast. And obviously stay tuned. We'll be back next week with another episode of WireTaps.
Very good. Thank you, Graham. Stay safe, everyone. Good luck.